Welcome to Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. This coming Monday marks 78 years since the Allies launched Operation Overlord against Hitler's Atlantic Wall, creating another front against Nazi Germany, and the end of the war would be less than a year away. Of course, most of us simply refer to this pivotal event of the 20th century as D-Day. The massive operation began with paratroopers dropping into Normandy. Among them was Henry Langrehr of the 82nd Airborne. His story of World War II combat began by jumping out of a plane, but it also includes hand-to-hand fighting in the hedgerows of Normandy, being taken prisoner of war by the Germans, and making a dramatic escape. Today, we are honored to tell his story. Henry Langrehr was born and raised in Clinton, Iowa, and has lived all of his civilian life there. He was 17 years old when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and he vividly remembers the moment he heard the news.
I heard about it. I was an usher in the theater, and they came rushing in, the newspaper people, and saying that America's been attacked, Pearl Harbor has been attacked. Well, right away, you felt, well, maybe I should enlist. Well, I was my last year in high school, 12th grade, and I decided I'd enlist. So I went down and enlisted in the Army, and I took my combat engineers training at Camp Cook, California. That time, 40% of the boys in my class volunteered for service in the various branches of the service. They didn't finish their school year. We missed about 2 months. So going into the service, I went into the paratroopers because you got to remember, I come up through the Great Depression, and I was looking at dollar figures, and that paratrooper paid good money. So I figured there's where I wanted to go.
When Langrehr joined the U.S. Army Airborne, he found out right away that his drill instructors meant business during training.
Very rigorous, very rigorous. We had to serve 5 jumps. The 5th jump you could refuse. That meant you were washed out. But if you did the 5th jump, you were in. And the training went on from there. Very rigorous. Calisthenics, 25-mile hikes, and just about any kind of calisthenics, So very rigorous.
Soon enough, Langrehr began jumping out of planes. And while many people would be apprehensive at first, Henry was ready to go.
I was always kind of a fellow that liked to do things like that. And I just enjoyed it. I felt like a carnival. Yeah, I was not afraid. I looked out the door, looked down to the ground, and said, oh, here I go.
After shipping off to England, the rigorous training continued in advance of the D-Day invasion. He says there were sandboxes set up during the training so the paratroopers could pinpoint where they would land. Unfortunately, as we learned later, most paratroopers would not be landing where they had planned. Finally, on June 5th, 1944, it was time for the invasion. Before the multitude of planes could cross over the Normandy coast, they had to safely take off and get organized over England. Langrehr says that was no easy task.
When we left England, our division was scattered in different airports because there was too many planes for any one airport. So we kind of had a circle around to wait for our group to get together. And in the process, it was a beautiful moonlit night, I saw down on the floor of the ocean, boats all over. And I swear I could have thought I could walk to France on boats. There must have been 5,000 down there. I'm just guessing, but boy, it was a lot of boats down there. And then overhead, we had the bombers going in. And above them was the fighters. And it was fantastic. I thought to myself, we could never lose this war. Look at all the equipment and everything. One of my grandsons said to me, I don't remember which one it was, but he said to me, Grandpa, I wished I could see what you saw through my eyes. Pretty profound.
But as impressive as the sight below him was, the reality of the mission soon became very clear, as the C-47s came under heavy fire from German anti-aircraft guns.
Getting into the plane, for me, I was the last one on because I had a leg pack of 20 pounds of explosive tied to my leg. So when I went out, it would go out with me. And when we got over Cherbourg, the Pathfinders had gone ahead of us, and some of the other troops had gone ahead of us, so the German attack was pretty active. Lit up the sky like the 4th of July. Seen a couple of our planes go down, one exploded, and I saw one plane just almost disintegrate next to us. It got hit direct. And we had a shell that broke or exploded right outside of our plane on a wingtip, kind of. And in the process, the shrapnel went through our plane, and it killed one guy on one side of me and another man on the other side. So we took a lot of flak. And the C-47 was a slow-moving plane, pretty much of a sitting duck for any aircraft, So we was very fortunate we got food.
Finally, it was time to jump. Henry Langrehr landed in Normandy without injury, but it wasn't exactly smooth.
Well, I jumped in. It was in the city, Eglise. There had been a big fire, the building burning off to the side, and the French people were out fighting the fire, and the German guards and that down there. And when we came over, I was the first man out, so I jumped and I went down and I went through the glass panels of a greenhouse. But leg pack went in through first, so I didn't get scratched up.
And Langrehr still remembers much of what he saw on the ground.
Down on the ground, I could see the fire burning, and I could see the French people out there fighting the fire. But I landed across from the church with this greenhouse. It was in a big stone building, and there was about a 4-foot wall around it. And I jumped over that wall and went through the churchyard, and there was some shooting in there. They had set up a machine gun in one stand there, and I could see John Steele hanging from the steeple.
Landing right in the heart of Sainte-Mère-Église might sound like Langrehr landed very close to his target. In reality, he was pretty far away, but he says there were far worse mistakes made while sending the paratroopers into Normandy.
We dropped in town, and we should have dropped by the bridges. But, another big mistake that our spies or the people that should have been in the know-how, they thought the swamps, the Germans had flooded the whole area. The only thing that stood out in the water was the roads and the bridges. So the Germans had to get those bridges, and we lost a lot of men that landed in the water and drowned because our so-called know-how people, I guess, thought that was grass, and it was water.
Once he started moving, Langrehr knew what he had to do next. It was the same thing many of the paratroopers were tasked with doing: finding and securing their assigned bridges, and preventing the Germans from controlling them. Langrehr says getting control of those bridges was the only way the beach invasion could ultimately work.
If the Germans controlled those bridges, the beaches could never happen, because they would get their tanks and they would get their equipment down there, and they just wouldn't have had a chance. It was plenty tough for the beach force the way it was, but it would never happen. And Eisenhower had it right when Mallory said to him, well, you're going to sacrifice 2 wonderful infantry divisions, he says, and it'll never succeed. Well, it did succeed, so Mallory afterwards apologized to General Eisenhower. He said he hated to make more problems for him at the time when he was making big decisions, But, each one knew what he was supposed to do. And Lafayette was the bridge that was the most contested.
So Langrehr made his way to his assigned bridge. But when he got there, he was in for a surprise. A pleasant surprise.
My job was to go down and to chef de pont. And if we couldn't hold the bridge, I was to blow it. And I was supposed to, if we got down there and no one was there, I had to check it for explosives. The Germans probably had it wired. And anyway, that was my job. But when I got down there, the 508 had been there before we got in. They made a better landing than we did. And they had already taken the bridge, so I didn't have to do anything, just act as infantry.
With the bridge already secured, General James Gavin, the commander of the 82nd Airborne, redeployed many of his men, including Henry Langrehr.
General Gavin came and gathered a bunch of us up down. They didn't need us all down at DuPont, Chef DuPont. So we went down to La Fere to be backup infantry in case the Germans broke through, had a second line defense. But yeah, that was a real bad battle. And you got to remember, paratroopers didn't carry much heavy equipment to fight tanks in it with. So you had to make use with what you had. You know, we had bazookas. And about the best thing a bazooka could do is knock the tank's tracks off. Well, that stopped the dead, but that didn't stop the people on the inside from shooting at you. So, but it was really, really tough. Really tough. We lost a lot of good men in that.
But despite the early successes, the margin for error for the paratroopers was very thin. Langrehr recalls that he and other paratroopers who were folded into the infantry were not carrying much ammunition.
We could have lost that war very easily too, because we carry just what we need on our body. So our ammunition was getting very, very low. And I know Colonel Cruz come by and he said, "Boys, make every round count." He said, because everybody's getting low on ammunition, and I don't want to tell the citizens of the town that we may have to leave, but I don't know where they were going to get away. We had ocean on one side of us and the Germans on the other side. So, I mean, we were there, you know, and there was no escaping for us.
When we come back, Henry Langrehr takes us into the vicious fighting in the Normandy hedgerows and tells the story of how he was taken prisoner by the Germans. I'm Greg Corombus. This is Veterans Chronicles, and we'll be right back. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombus. Our guest in this edition is Henry Langrehr, a veteran of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division, who parachuted into Normandy in the very early morning of June 6, 1944. After securing the bridges behind the beaches and allowing the invasion to proceed without Germans being able to send reinforcements, the fighting for the next month unfolded in the hedgerows of Normandy. These large mounds of dirt and very thick vegetation that marked property lines in the area made rapid progress virtually impossible and led to some vicious, close fighting. And Henry Langrehr was right in the middle of it.
The hedgerow fighting was almost like jungle fighting, because the fields were divided by these hedgerows, which were probably anywhere from 10 to 18, 20 feet high, with shrubbery growing out of the tops of them. And it was very close hand fighting a lot of times. One instance, I came across, we was assaulting a hedgerow, and Germans always crisscrossed the fields. They'd been there a long time, and they had defenses set up, and they knew just exactly where to put their machine guns and their tanks and that. And well, anyway, and the crisscross firing, we'd run across the hedgerow to hedgerow, and the Germans would be shooting like crazy at us. And I'd see men dropping on one side of me and the other, and I knew the Germans were crisscrossing their fire, but why didn't they hit me? I was very fortunate. So on this one occasion, we got to a hedgerow, and we'd gone through it, and I carried a Thompson submachine gun and a 45 sidearm. Well, when we got through this hedgerow, which got the Germans pushed back to the next hedgerow, and as I just came to the top of the hedgerow, I just glanced, and there was a German laying in a slit trench there, and he had his rifle alongside him, but he was looking the other way. When I saw him, he saw me. My gun jammed. So of course we always carried a knife in our boots, so I took the knife and I cut his throat. And that's how close it was. Another occasion I had, we were coming through hedgerow, and the growth was pretty thick at the top, and I had just got, maybe from here to that doorway, and a German popped up, and he had his gun in his hand, but he had got tangled in grapevines or something there. And again, my gun misfired. So I had to take him down and beat him to death with the butt of my gun. So it was that kind of fighting, very savage, and very gruesome in ways.
The breakout from Normandy would come in early July, but Henry Langrehr was not around to see it. By then, he had been captured by the Germans and taken prisoner. Here, he shares the story of how he became a POW.
We was just getting out of the hedgerows, and there was more tanks in this area for some reason. I don't know what. But anyway, we had assaulted and pushed the Germans back. Well, the Germans always, when they go back, they hit another group and their reinforcements. And then if they got pressured harder, then they push them back to another group. Till finally, you couldn't push them anymore. Well, that was the case. We had the Germans push back pretty good. Well, it so happened they bought up armor, and German tanks started running wild over the front. We had no tanks at all. In fact, in Normandy, there was only one opening in the hedgerows, and that's where the farmer bought his wagons and his livestock in. And I'd seen tank after tank of our tanks that tried to go through those openings, and the Germans had them zeroed in with an 88, and they'd knock them out every time. So we didn't have any armor at that time, so we was fighting mostly with bazookas and hand weapons. So the Germans kind of overrun our first lot. I was in the first row of trenches, slit trenches, and the tanks started running over the slit trenches. They were just crushing the guys. When they got within range of our small arms, I thought, where's my bazooka man? And I turned around to look, and he had been shot, and he was laying down, bazooka right beside him. So I got up and went back to get the bazooka, and I picked the bazooka up and aimed at the tank. And about that time, he had rotated his tank gun, the 88, and I looked right at that thing, and that barrel looking about that big around, you know, and I thought, oh, he's not going to shoot me with that big gun. Sure enough, he fired a shell, and it must have lit behind me. It must have been shooting behind me. And anyhow, that was it. I had shrapnel on my back and my legs, and I was pretty much out of it. So they took me prisoner.
The next order of business for Langrehr was to survive his injuries, and at first, he was not optimistic he would make it.
I was feeling really bad. They took me, they had a field hospital, and their doctor just did so much, and he says, well, we have to send you back to a hospital in Paris. So they loaded us up in field trucks, and I was in there with a couple, 2, 3 other guys, and they were all hurting pretty bad. Most of us in and out of conscious, you know. They gave us as much help as they could in the field, but that wasn't enough, you know. So Uh, it took us about 2 days to get to Paris, which should have been just a matter of a few hours, but we had our fighter planes were covering the highways and that all the time. They wouldn't dare move during the day. They'd get shot up. Even at night, sometimes if it didn't have the lights dimmed and that, they would get shot up. But anyway, they took us by these truck into Paris, and a German doctor operated on me and did a good job because, back surgery back then was pretty touchy. And so I came through it okay. And I still have some shrapnel in my back, but the doctors always said, leave it unless it bothers you because it's more dangerous to surgery than it would be without. So I still carry that in my back yet.
When we come back, Henry Langrehr takes us inside his forced labor inside a German coal mine, his daring escape, and the drama that followed. I'm Greg Corombos, and this is Veterans Chronicles. This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Our guest in this edition is Henry Langrehr, a veteran of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division, who parachuted into Normandy on June 6, 1944 as part of the Normandy invasion. He later fought in the brutal battles in the hedgerows, but at the end of June 1944, Henry was taken prisoner and had to recover from serious injuries. Once he had recovered to some extent, the Germans put him to work in a coal mine. Langrehr recoiled at those orders and found himself frequently at odds with his guards.
Well, I went to prison camp 12A, and that they sent different groups out from 12A, kind of a assembly point, and then from that they sent them out to different areas to work. Some in work camps, some in. I was sent to a coal mine, and the coal mine was probably, I'd say maybe a quarter of a mile underground. And the first time I got down in the mine, I was sent into an outpow. Outpow, these places where they mine coal, were like an igloo and kind of held together. So they blasted the coal out, but when they blasted the coal out, then they hit, I think it was soapstone that wouldn't support that anymore, and it would cave in. But anyhow, the first time I got there, there was an old Czech miner in there, and this SS guard, and the SS guard said to me, "Arbeit." And I said, "No." I said, "Geneva Convention says I'm not supposed to work for enemy forces, so I'm not going to work." Oh boy, I should have never said that, because he took, and just like lightning, he took his rifle and hit me in the back and knocked me down, and then he did a little kicking on me, and I got beat up pretty bad. So I got up and worked with what I could do, and putting coal in the cars and that. So the next day I came in, the old Czech miner said to me, don't get them mad. Don't get them mad. They'll kill you. They'll kill you. And I said, well, I don't intend to get them mad, but I ain't going to work. And I said the same thing to the guard again. I got beat up again. So I figured I better get my stuff together and work if I have to. So then I started throwing some stones and that in coal, and we had little carts, and they run on a little track, in there, and we would put coal in there, and then when that was full, they'd take that out and put another one in, and I kept throwing rocks in it. Each man had a cart, so I filled the carts up and put coal in, little rocks in it, a little more coal. And then next day, I think it was, the guard came back down, said, "You, what have you been doing?" He said, you're sabotaging. He says, "You're putting rocks in the coal." I said, "How do you know that?" Well, your car's numbered. I didn't realize that. And they're so meticulous, they keep track of all that when it come up, you know. I didn't realize that. And they knew exactly where it come from. So then I got the message.
A short time later, Langrehr and his fellow prisoners narrowly avoided dying in a cave-in. The only reason they didn't is because they were out on a lunch break at the time. But throughout the imprisonment, Langrehr and other prisoners talked about the opportunity to escape, concluding they would be worked to death in the coal mine anyway. He says the warnings against escaping, though, were very clear. Still, they felt it was worth the risk.
A friend of mine, he was a former paratrooper, but he was from the 101st, Tim McMillan. And he had talked to me on the way back to our barracks. Our barracks was about half, 3/4 of a mile away from the mine. And on the process, we usually had 2 guards in the front, 2 guards in the center, and 2 guards at the tail. And Jim said one time, he says, we're going to die, he said, in this mine if we don't do it. And when we first came to that mine, the adjutant in control of the mine, an SS Major, came out and got up on a stand and had us line up in front of him, and he said, I have a message for you. He says, if anybody tries to escape from here, we'll catch you and we'll shoot you. And that happened twice when I was there. Not out of my coal mine, but they came from our coal mine, but not the group that I was with. Because the shifts, like I said, were 12-hour shifts. And we was working the night shift at that time. And when they caught them, they lined them up, and I think they were White Russians. They were the ones that they shot. Lined them up against the wall and shot them and put them in wooden boxes, and then we all had to walk by there. Then after that, Major standing up there again, and he's saying, that's what will happen to anybody that tries to escape. Well, we knew that would happen, but we knew also we didn't ever know when the war was going to end or anything, and we were getting to where we were either thinking one way or the other. We have to either try to escape, or if we get escape and get caught, we know what's going to happen, but we're going to die in the mines. So we did. One time we was coming, it was in early April or May. I lost track at the time, but anyway, it was still kind of snowy and sleety out, and we was walking up back to the barracks, and we was short 2 guards in the middle. For some reason, the guards weren't in the middle. Well, we passed this area of undergrowth and that, and Jim said to me, let's go. And I said, well, you made the decision, we'll go. And we went, and when the group got back to the barracks, they always counted everybody when they left the mines, and when they got back to barracks, they were short 2 guys. So they knew somebody's got to escape and left for some reason. Well, then they put the alert out. Well, we were on the move, and we didn't know the area at all. You know, I mean, we had never been outside of the mine other than barracks. So we didn't realize the mines were close to a little village. And when we got close to this village, but one of the guys from the Volkssturm, a soldier from the Volkssturm, they're usually guys that had fought in a war or something, lost an arm or can't see real well, and that they were using them for policemen in the areas, you know. Anyway, the Volkssturm spotted us and he hollered for us to halt. Oh, we knew it was going to happen. Well, as luck would have it, there was a big barn right close by. Maybe the width of this building out there, maybe say 30 feet. We took off running to the building, and he didn't shoot then, but he knew he probably had us when we got in the building. And sure enough, we got inside the building, there was nothing there. Well, Jim was trying to find a place to hide, and I stood back of the door, and when he come in the door, I took it. They had like a 2x4, and they put it across these cross arms to lock the door on the inside, and I hit him across the face and killed him. And but before I could do that, the minute he come in the door, he saw Jim in the building, and he shot him dead. And that's when I hit him across the face, and I took his gun and his ammunition and everything, and I took off running because I know people heard the shot. And sure enough, I got down to an area with kind of scrubby brush in that, and I could hear they had the dogs out, and they used the dogs usually to hunt down. Well, as luck would have it, there was a small stream, probably 20 feet wide, and maybe in some areas maybe 2.5, 3 feet deep. So I took to the water. I knew that the dogs couldn't pick my scent up in the water, but the water was pretty cold because it was early spring, and the snow melt and that. And I probably went maybe a 3/4 of a mile, and I knew I couldn't stand there much longer. I'd get hypothermia. So I got out. I couldn't hear the dogs anymore. They'd given up the search. I think they probably figured I hadn't gone too far, and they'd wait until it got light and they'll find me. So I was far enough away, I couldn't hear the dogs anymore.
Langrehr had escaped and avoided capture in the immediate hours after that. But he was still in big trouble. He had no food and was well behind enemy lines. But with no other options, he pressed on for the dramatic journey that followed.
And I got away, but that was only part of the story because I was in enemy territory and way behind the lines, and I had different occasions where I watched the roads, and the roads were parallel with the creek area and that there the first time. Well, the first time I slept in a cemetery, and I figured nobody would bother you there. And then I waited there until the next night, and the next night I took off again, going west. I was following the stars. We learned to navigate at night by using the stars. So anyway, I was trying to stick close to a road that was running west because I knew the Americans were coming from the west. So I usually would waylay a soldier or somebody at night that I knew would have food. I knew the Germans always kept like sausage, cheese, and stuff in their knapsack. So I'd waylay a German soldier or something. And I've done that several different times. And one time I come to a little village, and I seen a light in a little built house there, and I thought, well, I wonder if there's anybody home I could get in and get something there, because I got pretty hungry, just getting what I could along the road. And I made a mistake. It was the Volkswagen station. Yes, but there was only 2 in there. So again, I had to do what I had to do, and I knew darn well that they would be looking for me. So I took off again, and then I tried to hide near the road, but yet in underbrush in that. And so I got to the point where I could hear artillery firing, and I knew it was American artillery. next morning, I seen a spotter plane come out, Piper Club, and the road was full of refugees and soldiers. The refugees came first, and then come German infantry down the road, and then come German tanks, half-tracks, and the rest. And they were all retreating. The Americans were pushing them back. So I was in the underbrush about, maybe the length of a football away from the road. And I seen that Piper Club up there, and I knew he was going to radio back to direction fire. So sure enough, about 5 minutes later, they laid down a barrage on that road. It just completely wiped it out. So I thought, well, the Americans are not far behind. So I waited another day, and the Germans had already passed, and I seen American infantry coming in. I thought, I ain't going to get out now. Somebody's going to shoot you. Well, they would, because, I imagine I looked pretty bad, And so I waited until infantry got by, the ones that were on the road. And a guy in a Jeep had stopped there, and I don't know what he was doing. Probably radioing back something. In those days, the radios were pretty big in a Jeep, field radio. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I come up behind him and tapped him on the shoulder, and then he was scared. And he said, "Don't ever do that to me. They scared me out of crapping my pants." And he said, "What are you doing out here? You look terrible." And I said, "Well, I just escaped from a German prison camp." And I said, "Maybe you could take me back, headquarters and that." So he took me back to headquarters, and they called in. They had a field there where they were landing fighter planes and transport planes, C-47s and that. So they take me over there and put me on there, and I went back to Camp Lucky Strike in France, and I spent time there. And when we got there, of course, the doctors examined us and see how bad we were and that. I was 150 pounds when I went in. I was 98 pounds at camp. Yeah, Lucky Strike. And the doctor says, "Well, now you can enjoy yourself." He said, "I know you guys haven't had any good food or anything. Anything you want, you tell them. You'll get it." Oh, man. We want shakes, hammer, and all this stuff. Just gorging ourselves, getting sick. Did I ever get sick? And I said, the next day to the doctor, he come back to me. I said, "Why did you say that?" Well, he said, "I wanted you to learn a lesson. Don't overdo it." He said, "You've got good food here. Take your time and adjust to it."
Henry Langrehr, a veteran of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division. He is a veteran of D-Day, the Battle of Normandy, and was a German prisoner of war before escaping. And his family's legacy of service continued. 3 of his grandsons served in the very same company of the 82nd Airborne as he did. And then, a great-grandson did the same. I'm Greg Corombus, and this is Veterans Chronicles. Hi, this is Greg Corombus, and thanks for listening to Veterans Chronicles, a presentation of the American Veterans Center. For more information, please visit americanveteranscenter.org. You can also follow the American Veterans Center on Facebook, and on Twitter, we're at AVC Update. Subscribe to the American Veterans Center YouTube channel for full oral histories and special features, and of course, please subscribe to the Veterans Chronicles podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and please join us next time for Veterans Chronicles.